G'day and welcome back to the Research Project History as we continue our look at the wars of the Diadochi. In particular, the war between Seleucus, who had returned to his satrapy, and Antigonus, who wanted to oust him from it, called the Babylonian War. The Third War had just concluded in late 311, with Antigonus coming to terms with his rivals Ptolemy, Cassander and Lysimachus. Notably, he did not come to terms with Seleucus, and it is the continuation of this fight for control of the eastern provinces that we'll be focusing on today. Compared to previous events in the Wars of the Diadochi, our narrative history sources for the Babylonian War are significantly lacking. With Diodorus focusing on the events in his native Syracuse for this period, and only giving us details of the events that led up to the conclusion of the Third War of the Diadochi, and Demetrius' campaign into Babylon at the close of 311. Diodorus may not be entirely to blame, as his main source, Hieronymus of Cardia, was in Antigonus' employ, and may have had external pressure from Antigonus not to wax lyrical about events that would lead him to lose about half of his previous territorial claims. Our only literary sources outside of Diodorus are a brief mention by Plutarch in Demetrius 7.3 of the situation at the start of the war, and a description of a battle between Seleucus and Antigonus in Polyaenius Stratagems 4.9.1, seemingly at the end of the war. While our traditional literary sources for the period are seriously lacking, we do have the Chronicle of the Diadochi, two fragmentary pieces of a tablet. It is thought to be a 4-column tablet, of which we have parts of column 1 and 4. The first column deals with the First War of the Diadochi, while the fourth gives us some details of the Babylonian War, although the tablet is also preoccupied with the restoration of the Esagila temple dedicated to the Babylonian god Marduk in the city of Babylon, a restoration work that had been commissioned by Alexander the Great. The tablet itself is dated to the Seleucid period, meaning that although the information contained in it is sparse, its provenance is good in terms of its relationship to the events. The Babylonian chroniclers, to their credit, were detailed in their keeping of dates and events, giving us a few key markers around which we can construct some sort of narrative. Added to that is another cuneiform source, the Astronomical Diaries, focused on observations of the sky, although with a few scattered comments about the situation in and around Babylon, and carefully listed dates that once again help to pinpoint certain factors in the war. Turning to the war itself, Seleucus was vulnerable as his allies in the previous war had agreed to a truce with Antigonus and retreated to their provinces. Antigonus would be able to focus his considerable might and attention on his Seleucid problem. Babylon was a resource-rich hub in the far east of the empire, with access to overland and by the river to sea trade routes. If we were to have any hope of domination in the Hellenistic world, Antigonus would need it back. From Plutarch in Demetrius 7.3, we have a description of the situation at the start of the war, with the initial attack of Demetrius in the late summer or autumn of 311, at around the time his father was negotiating the peace of the dynasts, where Demetrius plundered the city of Babylon while Seleucus was campaigning against Nicanor and those loyal to Antigonus further to the east. And I quote, Demetrius, accordingly, expecting that he would find Mesopotamia unprotected, suddenly crossed the Euphrates and invaded Babylonia before Seleucus could stop him. He expelled from one of its citadels, for there were 2 of them, the garrison left there by Seleucus, got it into his power, and established in it 7,000 of his own men. But after ordering his soldiers to take and make booty of everything, which they could carry or drive from the country, he returned to the seacoast, leaving Seleucus more confirmed than before in his possession of the realm. For by ravaging the country, Demetrius was thought to admit that it no longer belonged to his father. This description fits with what we have in Diodorus 19:100.7, where he writes, When Demetrius on his arrival at Babylon found the city abandoned, he began to besiege the citadels. He took one of these and delivered it to his own soldiers for plundering. The other he besieged for a few days, and then, since the capture required time, left Archelaus, one of his friends, as general for the siege, giving him 5,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry, while he himself, the time being close at hand at which he had been ordered to return, made the march down to the sea with the rest of his army. These joint descriptions then feed into column 4, lines 8 and 9 of the Diadochi Chronicle, wherein events of 311 into 310 are described. We have Seleucus leaving Babylon entrusted to an unnamed person, who from Diodorus we know to be Patrocles, while he himself made a sortie into Persia. When Seleucus had returned to Babylon between April and August of 311, he had been in an extremely weak position, returning with only 1,000 men. While that had been boosted by those who had turned over to him on his return, and those he integrated into his army after his surprise victory over Nicanor on the Tigris in 311, his forces would still have been dwarfed by those at Antigonus's disposal. It seems his move into the far eastern provinces would hold a twofold purpose: to gather more troops before Antigonus could return, and neutralise a threat to his rear for Nicanor and others who were still loyal to the one-eyed general. By the end of 311, Seleucus had taken over the neighbouring province of Susiana, and was making no attempt to disguise the fact that Media and then the satrapies further east were his next targets. Coming into 310 then, we have the situation of Archelaus to continue besieging those loyal to Seleucus in one of Babylon's 2 citadels, while from outside the city, Patrocles, Seleucus's appointed governor, was leading a campaign of guerrilla warfare and continued skirmishing with Antigonid forces, while also sending for aid from Seleucus, who was at the time in Media. Combining the Babylonian Chronicle with the other cuneiform tablet source, the Astronomical Diaries, it seems to indicate that Antigonus, having launched a full-scale invasion of the east, early in the campaign took control of the city of Babylon, but was soon after thrown out by Seleucus when he returned from the east in late 310. From line 14 to 16 of the Diadochi Chronicle, we have events from the month Abu, that is August-September 310, through to Tetabu, that is January-February 309. It notes fighting between the soldiers of Antigonus and Seleucus in and around Babylon. In late January 309, the 8th day of Tetabu, after 5 or 6 months of fighting, it seems that Antigonus had a change of tactic, and moved to extract wealth from the province rather than control it. Attacking the city and controlling at least part of it, in an area close to the Esagila, the temple that was of special concern to the writers of the Chronicle. However, he was unable to take the whole city, and at some point in the next month, Sabbatu, that is the 30th of January to the 28th of February 309, Antigonus departed the city, having plundered it and the surrounding countryside. From Babylon he plundered Cuthar, where in the previous year the Satamu of Emelsaim, that is the council chairman of the temple of Nergal in Cuthar, had sided with Seleucus against Antigonus. There he drove the people out and plundered the city, setting fire to the storehouse of the temple of Nergal. This wanton destruction of provisions and the sacred sites indicates he was no longer interested in currying favour with the local population. From there, he appointed Archelaus as satrap of Akkad and the area surrounding Babylon, further indicating that Antigonus was looking to leave the territory, although not willing to give it up entirely. Archelaus and Antigonus used the spurious claim of Archelaus being the satrap to levy taxes and collect grain from the local populace. This seems to be a critical turning point, and the response from the people in our 2 cuneiform sources lists a strongly negative response. The Astronomical Diaries lists that there was panic in the land, the illegal collection of mustard and cress, while noting the rising cost of barley, dates and wool, with wool increasing from 1 mina to 1.5 minas over the course of the month. While in the Diadochi Chronicle it speaks of weeping and mourning in the land in response to the plundering of the city and the countryside. This action by Antigonus likely turned the people against him and in favour of Seleucus. From here our sources improve somewhat, where after the Diadochi Chronicle finishes with, on the 25th of Abu, that is the 10th of August 309, Archelaus and Antigonus's troops did battle with Seleucus. However, no details of the battle are given in the Chronicle. Our return to more descriptive history comes with Polyanius's description of the outcome and action subsequent to the battle. although it should be noted that it was written much later, in around the 160s to 180s CE. He writes, "In an engagement between Seleucus and Antigonus, the evening put an end to their undecided action, and both armies retreated to their respective camps, determined to renew the conflict the next day. The soldiers of Antigonus, in the meantime, put off their arms and relaxed in their tents. But Seleucus ordered his men to eat and sleep in their arms, and lie down in order of battle, that they might be ready for action whenever the charge was sounded. At break of day, the army of Seleucus rose up, already armed and in order. They immediately advanced against Antigonus, whose troops were unarmed and disordered, and therefore afforded an early victory to the enemy." This marked a sudden end to the conflict. It must have been a decisive defeat, because Antigonus departed for Syria and refocused his energies on more peaceful pursuits, such as building his new capital city, Antigonea. Apart from anything else, he was now over 70 years old, and his great weight, we may guess, was putting a strain on his heart. Even in the absence of evidence, it seems safe to say that Antigonus and Seleucus must have entered into a treaty. For some time afterward, they each went about their separate businesses, without infringing on each other's territories. Antigonus abandoned the eastern satrapies, and over the next few years Seleucus gained control of them one by one, through conquest or by reaching an agreement with the incumbent ruler. What he didn't manage to get control of were the Indian satrapies, and after a conflict with Chandragupta, in exchange for 500 war elephants, he reached a peace agreement with him. Between 309 and 307, Archelaus continued operating in some form in and around Babylon, without managing to eliminate the resistance of troops who remained loyal to Seleucus. In the end, it was Seleucus's return from further east that settled the problem, and by 306 Seleucus had completely recovered Babylonia. Given the enormous size of the territories involved, and how few troops Seleucus had started with, this is a truly astonishing beginning for a kingdom that was to last in some form or another for 250 years. What is not surprising is that he was pleased to be invested with the honorific name that he bore for the rest of his life, Nicator, the bringer of victory, the only one to have successfully challenged Antigonus's rulership of Asia. Where the Third War had finished with inconclusive results, this one left no doubts. Seleucus won. It's also important not to downplay the significance of the war just because of the lack of sources. Starting from essentially nowhere, the Seleucid dynasty and kingdom was now in a position to play a pivotal role for much of the rest of the Hellenistic period. While all this had been occurring, Ptolemy continued fighting against cities garrisoned by Antigonus in Cilicia and the Hellespontine region in league with Lysimachus and Cassander. Although initially victorious, they were defeated by Antigonus' son Philip in the Hellespont and Demetrius in Cilicia. With skirmishing and deal-making continuing on a fairly ongoing basis while Antigonus remained busy in the east, the Diadochi were once more sliding towards open war. We'll look at the details of that next time, as we build up to the Fourth War of the Diadochi. Thanks for joining me. As always, key sources are listed in the description below, and if you haven't already, please like the video, or even better, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Cheers.